Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Daryl Yazzie Jr. I'm an extension agent, as mentioned, with the Neck College Land Grant Office. And today's PowerPoint is going to be on Mini Hoop House. And this will just be kind of general information of what that means and what that looks like and how could you use it. And so, yeah, going forth, what is a hoop house? Um, and there's a little definition here. The main difference between a greenhouse and a hoop house is that the hoop house is a semi-permanent structure extending the growing season, while a greenhouse is a permanent structure with climate control abilities and often has ventilation and heating units to maintain temperatures, humidity, and airflow. And this is basically a hoop house structure. If you can see that there's we call these metal ribs that go all the way down. There's a support system in the middle and on the sides, which are generally blocked off by some type of door or a wall that you have to look into um, putting up based on the size and width of your hoop house. And then generally these will have like a plastic covering or sometimes a mesh or sometimes both, depending on your operation and where you're located and so forth. And the mini hoop house is based in these type of conditions in a regular hoop house. They will have these small rows in between that are constructed. They're usually by like 2 by whatever length of your hoop house are. You can kind of mitigate that based on what you want to grow, how you want to grow it, and um who's your, I guess, your buyers and stuff like that. But anyways, that's where you would have your mini hoop house. So it's a mini hoop house inside of a bigger hoop house. So it's a double protection layer for plants, especially those that are not so well temperature fluctuation orientated. So plants that love warmer conditions or need protection from the wind or the cold or the breeze, they kind of offer that protection for those plants. And as mentioned, season extender, instead of having the short time period of a growing season, it extends it a little more. You can grow a little bit more after the end season, or you can start a little bit before the start growing season. So those are just the general information about what season extenders are, and these are ways that individuals have done that and have been successful in growing their own crops when it's cold outside and stuff like that. Or if you have really sensitive plants that don't do well in windy regions, this is a way to protect them from the wind. Or if they like a little bit more humidity, or if they like a little bit more heat too. So if you've ever been in some of these hoop houses, they are really warm during the sunny days, but they can also be cold during the night too. So just uh, depending on what you grow inside of it, will kind of determine the use and preference of one's goal with these hoop houses. And then the mini hoop houses, as I mentioned, are the ones in the middle. And then the difference between, I just wanted to do a little bit background on this really quick. The difference between a greenhouse and a hoop house. As you can see the two different photos here, a greenhouse is really more structured form. They have a lot more bars and metal ribs and structures that hold up like either glass or maybe acrylic plastic or some type of plastic that's kind of the walls of the outside, separating the outside from the inside. And so they create that barrier. And then on top of that, there's really well controlled. They have a heating, cooling system in there. They have fans that will help circulate air in there because it's so closed off from the outside. They don't want anything to really fluctuate. And if it's really hot region, then they have to have ACs. If it's in the winter time, then they bring on the heaters. And so it's really temperature orientated. Like there's a lot of components that go with it. And with that, it's really expensive. And sometimes they don't have a ground exposed. They usually have like a cement flooring or some type of something that's not dirt, basically, is what the foundation is. And then on top of that, plastic. And then a lot of those growing mediums in there are a lot different. So yeah, greenhouse stuff is a little bit different and really complex. That's a different topic. And then the hoop house on the right is going to be more a general form. It does have a closed system in a sense, but it's not as complex as a greenhouse. You have the metals that hold out the form, and then you have the plastic that's like maybe less than a half an inch thick, and that's kind of separating the outside temperature from the inside, but it's also able to acclimate a little bit better. It's able to heat up faster, but also keep that heat inside. And also if you have like water in the ground, it'll evaporate. So there's going to be a lot of humidity in there. So yeah, and then I'll cover what these things are in the middle of what those look like and what they could be used for. But that's the difference between a green and a hoop house, for those wondering. And then the mini hoop house, like I was saying, are the little structures that are within the hoop house themselves. And that's just a double protection layer for plants to start growing. Or maybe it's just a little extra precaution during the colder months, because it can get below freezing temperatures in the hoop house, even because it's not so well insulated, and maybe there's no heating system in there. So another way you can combat that without like involving any heaters or any like fans in that, then you can incorporate these little hoop houses. So yeah, aka season extenders. And then the ground prepping, I guess, for this one, generally this is what they look like depending on your resources and where you go to. The layout of the ground, generally you need to find that out, what type of spacing you have available for you. And then generally these are the guidelines that these beds are made from. So the width of it generally goes by your arm length of reaching across. So that's generally 2 to 2.5 feet wide. The length of it will vary based on what you want to grow and how you want to grow. So that's a little bit more free will there. So it can be like 2 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever you have access to, or however long of a length that you want. And then the height, generally they're like 3 feet tall, with the 2 feet wide on the side. And then there's gonna be these metal ribs, or not metal ribs, or you can have it metal, but usually due to cost expenses and stuff like that, they use these PVC piping of about an inch width, and they use that as the kind of like the arch to keep the form there. And then on top of that, they'll have these agrifabs, they call them agrifabs, or maybe like some type of mesh. And those meshes can be orientated based on what you're growing. Like if you have a plant that really loves sunlight, then you can have it white, or maybe have the white mesh kind of a little bit more open, so that it'll allow like some air to come through. Or you can have that coloration to like a beige, so it'll kind of cut out the light but offer but still bring in enough light. So that's another type of thing. As you can see at the bottom, that little shade below the mesh, and then you compare it to something that's not covered, it's like a 50% exposure. So it takes out half the light, but bringing in half of the light at the same time. So those agrifabs is what they call agricultural fabrics, are generally used for those types of conditions. But if you have plants that are growing at a length that are higher than the ground, then you want to have the arch there, and that's what those arch supports are for the PVC pipes. And then you would have like a T-post on the side at each end, and tie out the arches to pull away from the middle, so that way they can keep the form. Otherwise, if you didn't have that support at each end, then they would just collapse or fall inward. And so to keep that form of it being taut and pulled apart, then you need to have those two supports at the ends. And then yeah, like some of my little notes on the side say, measure out the lines to keep the square box. Sometimes people would put a line per corner. And then that's how they would keep within those their line straight when it comes to those raised beds, or maybe beds that were put into the ground and stuff like that. So and then spacing will also be determined based on what you're growing, because sometimes you're maybe like, let's say you want to grow cabbage next to a lettuce. If you grow those things next to each other, the cabbage will outgrow and push outward on its own. But also with that, it'll start to kind of shade out the lettuce, and the lettuce won't grow as abundant as it would if it were, kind of away from the cabbage, stuff like that. So making sure that the full growth of a plant that you're looking at, the leaf foliage coverage. And then based by that, you would then kind of measure out where you would plant those certain types of seeds. And then so a lot of these times these hoop houses are used for leafy greens, and I'll cover what that means in another slide. So if you want to grow corn or any really thick stalks like that in the greenhouse, they will grow, but you're going to be depleting a lot of your nutrients in your soil a lot faster than you would if you were growing like something smaller that doesn't grow as tall, that doesn't need a lot of energy or a lot of water resources. And then materials, tools, shovels, hammers, like your hand tools to help, stake down stuff, hit down, and put into the ground. Gloves, of course, water bottles, and whatever you need for yourself. Agrifabs, you can modify that. There are some companies out there that will do it, but at an extra cost. Or you can just buy the ones that are at the store. What I've seen done too, sometimes these agrifabs don't come already prefabricated to have piping through it. You would actually have to sew that into it. So if you have any friends, or if you yourself know how to do that, then you can actually modify that like that, and then put the piping through it, and then that way it'll hold its form a little better. Or you can just cover it like this picture here, where they just put it over it, and it works well, but it could be a little better. It could be a little bit more taut, but use what you have, and do you how it works out for you, basically. And then 1 inch PVC piping, like I was saying earlier. And then what can be grown in it? As you can see here, this farm demo out in Beaver Farms near Loop, with the Beaver Farm individuals, they have this mesh hoop house. Instead of using the plastic, they decided to go with this fabric that's more mesh. And that allows sun to come through, but also it breaks up the wind, but also it has like a light breeze in there. So it's not as hot as the plastic covering. It kind of keeps it moderately okay conditions, basically. And in here they grow a different variety of lettuces, some kale, and they also grow some carrots. And yeah. And so leafy greens, like I was saying, and that's like your kale, your lettuce, your spinach, your Swiss chard, those type of things that need a lot more care, I guess, in a sense, but also are easily broken if you were to kind of touch them. Or let's say you have animals that are around, you don't want them like in your garden and stuff like that. So those type of things, nothing too tall, like I was mentioning about the corn. You could do trees, but you really have to mitigate that too. um and something that needs higher humidity. So a lot of these plants that we were mentioning, they do love a little bit higher conditions when it comes to temperature, but they will do well in cooler conditions. And then they will do a lot better if they have a little bit higher humidity than just being exposed to the sunlight and stuff like that. So they will do really well in the greenhouse or hoop house type of setting. And then also something that doesn't really need direct sunlight. I feel like corn is one of those plants that really love the sunlight, because they have really broad leaves, they're really dark and green, and so they need all that energy. And also they need to have all the energy to start growing too. They're thick stalk, they're tall tassels, they're thick leaves, they're all their ear kernels and stuff like that. So they need a lot of energy. so they need a lot of direct sunlight exposure. But for a lot of these leafy green and stuff, you don't need to grow it too long. They kind of grow pretty fast, and once they reach a certain point, then you can pick it, and then you can, eat it or clean it and then consume it. Um, so yeah, so nothing that needs direct sunlight. Use as a tool to reduce water usage. As I mentioned, if you have a plastic covering, that will increase the humidity in the area, but since it also gets exposed to the sun and heats up a little bit faster, things can dry up a little bit faster in there. So it's good to have a good monitoring tool to help mitigate, your water loss, but also water usage. So it can be great, but if you don't monitor it enough, then it can fall back on you, and your plants will die basically. So it can get scorched. And then, community involvement makes easy work. That's what I found out about a lot of these methods of growing. But if you're doing it by yourself, then it's going to be a lot of work. So involving your family or even your small community around you to pick a work day and have all those materials already there for them to use, then you can try to, like, go through and kick it out in one day. I seen there's a hand raised.
Yeah,
Troy?
yeah. Hi, Daryl. I don't know if I heard your rules on asking questions.
Yeah, go
Do
ahead,
you?
ask it. It's okay.
Okay. So, out here in Tuba, the hoop house that I'm putting up right now, I want to say it's a 16 by 24, or
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those smaller sizes. But I'm wondering how, with Tuba we get all this sand, this fine sand. And I
Yeah.
think that what they're giving me is they're giving me that cover, that black one. I want to say it's
Okay.
cloth. Um, and so I'm wondering, how do you deal with the sand in that situation? Because that's kind of what I'm trying to already trying to think about what this planning season.
As far as are you talking about protecting your plastic from the sand?
Well, I mean everything, the fact that the sun's gonna be hitting the thing, and then is it gonna get into the pores of the thing, and then how much sand is gonna be coming through, and how am I gonna deal with that?
I think for that, I think I really haven't heard enough of that yet to be of a concern, and so I don't know of any solutions. But I feel like, let's see how this first year will go around and what challenges you do see. Just take note of it. And then we can help find solutions along the way. But at the moment, I don't have a direct answer for that.
Okay, well, I have like the natural windbreak. If you remember at my site, there's that huge cottonwood tree.
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
huge.
so I think this is another thing that when it comes to hoop houses and you're in a region where you get a lot of wind, to really think about those factors, because if you're talking about plastic protection, when it comes time of those months when it's really windy, a lot of that wind abrasion happens. How the metal moves from side to side and how that abrasion can start to rip your plastics. Um, at the moment, all I can think about, getting those sponges that can wrap around it to help protect your plastics from that abrasion. But even that will happen because in order for the plastic to cover right on the arch of a hoop house, you have to kind of tighten it. And so that's the issue that I've seen. At the moment, I don't really have an answer on how to protect that better. The only solutions I think I could have on that is to figure out a type of wind protection to reduce the wind, but also maybe redirect the wind away from the hoop house. Those are just little ideas that I've had over the years from concerns that I've been seeing from the communities that do have a hoop house in their area.
Okay, and yeah, and I was just wondering how much fine particulate or sand am I gonna be getting inside? I guess it's really dependent on the environment, but here we have that really fine red sand.
Yeah, And I think that's where you can kind of improve the cleaning process, maybe at the end when you're harvesting.
Mhm.
I think that's where I think a lot of the work would be put in. But to prevent it, maybe lining plastic at the top to help mitigate the sand away from the plants, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that's just my spur of the moment idea about that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to defeat the purpose of the porosity of that sheet.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I'm not saying to completely cover it with the plastic on the inside, just kind of have it hanging, but redirecting the sand away from the plants.
okay, I
The
think I,
mulch will still be
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think I can envision something. All right, thanks.
All right. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, like I was saying, community involvement makes easy work. The more hands you have, add a little it seems easy, but once you get into it and you start looking into the process, it does become tiring. Unless you're a really hard worker, but involving the community as a teaching space and teaching moment really gets people involved, but also that really, I mean, this would probably take a whole like day to set up, but if you had a lot of people, it'll be knocked out in a couple of hours. So that's an idea out there that I can put up. Do you need raised beds? You could. Not saying you can't. It's just gonna be a little bit more involvement of like resources, as I was saying. This is a little demo set up out in Red Valley High School that I was a part of. And at the time, they already had all these resources available and they already had it there and they had the manpower. So they were able to get these tall, nice raised beds that were really thick and sturdy. So yeah, so it just depends on your resources, how far you have to travel, how much you're willing to spend, and what you like it to look like. Does require a lot of physical work to, make the boxes, put in the different layers of lasagna beds into it, and then finally getting to your, sowing your seeds and growing those as well. But once you have it up, it's really great. Like it's a nice structure. It's just the startup investment kind of is costly, and knowing enough about it is another thing too. Needs to be redone every 2 years. I'm talking about the soil in between. Um, if you do it pretty well to where the nutrients will be there for maybe after 1 year, then great. But if you start to see a lot of this dysfunctional plant growth after the first year, that means you need to really look at your soil amendments and how you could improve that over the year. So for these raised beds here, we did a lasagna bed method type of layering. So at the bottom, we did these wood branches and wood chips and wood bark at the bottom, and then moistened that pretty well. And then we covered that with like some compost. And then on top of that, we did some like straw bale. And then on top of that, we did another layer of native, I guess, soil around the area. And then each layer we put down, we wet it down pretty good. So the humidity in there will be pretty good. And then on top of that, we put growing soil or potting soil on top of that, about maybe like 5 inches. And then they already had some of these seed starts that they had, and so we just put them in. And we had drip systems installed too, so we did that for that. So yeah, this is a really nice setup, and even like the runway was covered. They had really sandy soil. So one way that we proposed to them was like if they had like some type of mesh barrier, and then on top of that some gravel, because that sand is really sandy and it can be hard to keep something on top of it stable. So yeah, and then also like you can walk on it, you can yeah, so and it also suppresses a lot of the weed growth in the area too. So that's how they had that. And yeah, it's really nice that they did it that way.
Daryl, I have a
Um
question.
yeah, repeating the layers. So it's just basically green carbon, compost, carbon, and then your soils. There's really no specific order, but if you have larger particles when it comes to lasagna bed, you put those at the bottom so that they have time to break down. And then as you get towards the top, you pick something that's softer, but also doesn't take as long to break down. So that's why I'm saying like the wood goes at the bottom, your wood chips and all, and then you would wetting that pretty good, and then on top of that, you would probably put manure or maybe leaf cuttings, some type of carbon layer, and then on top of that, more greens. So that would be like your manure or your alfalfa hay, something that's green, or maybe even your kitchen scraps, or grass cuttings if you have grass cuttings. And then on top of that, another carbon base. So that's where your straw or your cardboard come into play, or even paper. And then on top of that, you're getting close to the top. So that's going to be the area where your plants will be growing. So that's where you get compost soil or potting soil, if you can get it, that much. I think these were 3 feet by 6 feet beds that were constructed. And so once we got to the top layer, we needed, I think, like 6 bags of those compost bags, compost soil, to fit like about 2 inches on top of it. And so they didn't have enough, so I just worked with what they had. But generally, you want about 6 inches of topsoil on top of that raised bed. So that way your plants that you transplanted to them will have enough growing space and growing medium and nutrients to go through that growing process. So the lasagna bed at the bottom will have time to kind of cook and condense and all that good stuff. Coffee grounds is good. Put it below the growing soil that you're going to be growing in. What do you mean? Is it taller or wider? Anyways, so continuing on. So if you have a space for raised beds, good. Sometimes people don't like to grow directly on the ground because when it comes to harvesting or managing their leaf litter that tends to die off, they have to get on their knees and you have to bend over and like take care of what you need to take care. And so raised beds are a great way to kind of bring it off the ground and almost at height level if you want that, and to really have that accessibility for those that have the disability. Height level accessible, so yeah. So yeah, and then critters, yeah, so they're also a great way to kind of combat, like if you have it in a exposed area and you have critter problems like rabbits, raccoons, or voles and moles and like that, something like that. This is a great way to combat those type of things. And then on top of this, if you really need to protect them, then you can build like a little fence area and a fence cover, so that way they don't get into it. Okay, and then additional options for season extenders are these wall of waters, which are basically plastics that are pretty heavy duty, and they are two plastics put together but sectioned out in columns. If you can see here, there's these spacing opens where you can put water into, and let me see. That's not a good picture of it. Anyways, so they're like about 1.5 feet tall to 2 feet. And there's basically plastic where they have columns where you fill them up with water. And once you have the all full, it acts as a little greenhouse for the plant that you're trying to protect from the cold conditions. During the day, it'll hold up and also kind of keep that little environment within it higher in humidity, but also higher in warmth. And then the water in the little columns will actually absorb the heat from the sun. And then in the evening time to night, it'll slowly dissipate that warmth for the plant, but also keep that little environment warmer longer until the next day. So that's how these wall of waters work. And they do really well. I've seen this farm start growing tomatoes and even chilies like in March, and they do so well that they actually start producing fruit, and they're surviving the cold frost and stuff like that. So if you can see here, they have the little arch on the far left side of this little hoop house area. They have the wall of waters, and then they have the little hoop arch, and then they have the hoop house on top of it. So that's a 3-layer system of protection, and that's something that I think that would work well, especially if you want to get a really good head start of the growing season. And this will put you about 2 to 2.5 months jump start. So yeah. And then, oh yeah, so for these hoop houses, there's a, I guess, con side of it, to where the pollination won't work as it would if it were exposed. Because if it were exposed and you have your pollinators that would come by, like the honeybees or the flies that are really fuzzy, or maybe even the moths, they would come by and help pollinate for you. But if you have a closed system, they would come in, yes, they would kind of pollinate for you, but then it would be too hot for them, so they would try to escape, but sometimes they'll just get stuck and die from heat exhaustion. So one way to kind of combat that is to pollinate your flowers yourself, especially if you're going to be growing like spinach. I mean, not spinach, squashes or watermelons or your tomatoes in there. And you can easily do that by getting a paintbrush or even some type of brush that's good at collecting the pollen from a male plant and then pollinating a female plant. So this flower here that you see is actually a female, and you can tell the difference between that based on the little the pistil and the stamen that come out from the center. A male will only have one that's coming out, poking out. A female will have multiple, as you can see here. And so you would just go from a male to a female and pollinate like that, and do it several times to make sure that the pollination did happen. Or maybe you can have both of ends of your hoop house open that are really wide, so that way it'll attract some of the pollinators to come in. And then also making sure that you make sure that your plants that you're selecting to grow in there, and if they're flowering to produce fruit, what that process looks like. Some of them are great at cross-pollinating themselves, but they do need access to wind a little bit. So that's the only thing. So yeah, just really know the plants that you're going to be growing and what processes they need to go from start to finish. Seed
Carol,
start.
you have a question from Troy. He wanted to know how much those water, I believe the wall of waters cost.
Oh
If
yeah,
that-
let me see. Oops. How do I go back? So these are, I think I've heard them say about $4 per section, or per column, I guess, and they sell them in packs for, I think, close to $20 of 4 or 5. And somewhere in Flagstaff, I forget which store, Warbur's, I forget. So they sell it either there in person or you can buy them online. But it's a cost investment, but if you know how to use them and take care of them, it pays for itself. And I would say they're a great addition to season extenders, especially in the springtime when cold drops start to happen below 30 and stuff like that. It fluctuates all the way to May. So these would be a great investment to go with, especially if you're going to be starting growing something that's sensitive to temperature, like your tomatoes and chilies. But you don't really need them for the lettuce. Lettuce are cold hardy, so they will do well in cold conditions. Yeah, Susan, from Hopi Extension with U of A. Yeah, she uses them in her garden too. So yeah, they work really well. On top of the extra protection from the little mini hoop house inside your current hoop house structure. So yeah, they work well. Like, they're a great investment if you can. Yeah, pollination seed starts, I think, are another great opportunity for you to use too as a season extender option too. The only thing is, like, you need these seeds trays, you need the soil, you need your seeds, and you need a proper growing space. But yeah, once you know how to use these different processes to your advantage, it really works well. Um, and yeah, I think and a lot about that goes back to your water source, if it's hardy or not, what nutrients are in it, and stuff like that. And that's something that I feel like a lot of us should know about, especially if we're going to be using it in our household for drinking water, or your dishes, and maybe you take a bath with it. So yeah, um, and then my last slide is gonna be about companion planting chart. You can take a screenshot of this with your phone, whatever you have usage of at the moment. I'm just gonna leave it up for a bit, but this is my last slide, like I was saying. And this one just kind of goes about if you're planting asparagus, what companion plants do well in that same bed, and then what it doesn't, what it doesn't go well with. So this is a little chart that I found and I thought was useful. Because this is always a question too in the growing world. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer the best I can. I don't have the answer for everything, but I have enough experience to answer enough.
Thanks, Daryl. If you guys have any questions, feel free to use your chat box. Or better yet, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Daryl, for taking the time and explaining this. The reason I joined is my 4-H club is planting, and that's one of our group projects. So
Oh,
I
nice.
saw a couple on, so it's, because we have to put stuff in our project books, like we attended a seminar or something. So you guys did a really good job, and this is the first time attending, so
Yeah, appreciate it. I like that feedback, and I congratulate you guys on starting your little 4-H and continuing that exposure to the little kids, because I think that's where a lot of our farmers will come from. So appreciate it. And if you need help with it, feel free to reach out. My email, I didn't put my email on my last slide, but it's just basically DYAZZIEJR@deneccollege.edu. So that's my point of contact. If you didn't get that, then I'll put it in the chat right now, actually.
Troy has another question. He would like to know what type of plants to grow in a hoop house considering the pollination issue. Okay.
Wait, say it again.
Troy has a question in the chat box.
I can ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so remember when we talk about the fact that this hoop house and its restriction on pollinators. How do you overcome that? Do you just end up selecting plants that don't require that allow you to self-pollinate, or how do you
I
do
think
it?
I think that comes back to what you want to grow and what you would maybe grow well. And then also if you're selling or not. And I was saying that these hoop houses are generally meant for plants that don't really need pollination. So that's why I was saying the leafy greens really do well. So let's say your lettuce, tomatoes, kale, chard, Swiss chard, maybe even beets, your rooted vegetables like your garlic, onions, beets, what was the other one? Anyways, other stuff that don't really need a flower to produce a fruit, or maybe even your herbs, your what do you call them? Let's see what else I can see. Parsley, your spinach, your radish, your turnips, chives, coriander, let me see, oregano, sage, mint, rosemary, basil.
Um,
Uh,
I was
yeah,
I
so
was just gonna say two things. One question and one comment. But the comment is that um I'm just I'm already afraid of the pest issue because of my experience with squash bugs, and so I probably would never want to plant squash in there, even though
Mhm.
it's easy to self pollinate or hand pollinate. But the
Yeah.
thing I and then, what about like aphids and stuff like that? And how bad can the pest issue get in these self-contained environments?
So that's where ventilation is really important. Of course, you need higher humidity and higher temperatures, but with those two conditions alone are a great place for mold, bacteria, fungus, and some of the smaller insects to start growing because they love those conditions. They like a wet environment, they love warm conditions, and they really love plants that will produce their own sugars at a higher rate than others. So they have that accessibility. And so why would they go elsewhere? And so in that, then they're like, okay, now I can, repopulate and reproduce at a large quantity. So that's where a lot of ventilation is really important, not only for that, but also to help mitigate the stress of the heat temperatures that the plants go through. Because if you ever notice on a hot day, a lot of plants start to wilt, and that's just to conserve water. So if the water from their leaves are evaporating at a high rate to where they're not able to keep up with it, and so they start to wilt to kind of shut down that process. But that's the process that they need to develop, to grow, to form, to um, make bigger leaves, to form their nice flowers, to grow abundant fruit. And so that's where ventilation kind of helps mitigate that. And it keeps the temperature to an adequate level, but also keeps the humidity to where it's not so abundant. So if you have proper ventilation, then it will help kind of mitigate those issues with pests and problem. I'm not saying it's going to get rid of it. It's just going to help lower the chances of that happening. So wind does really help in that area. But if you get high winds, I would say to kind of help reduce that wind pressure, I guess, because you can blow up your hoop house. I've seen that happen before, to where the pressure was too much and the plastic kind of just um stretched out from the inside. So
Okay,
yeah, if
and then
you
the
do
other
notice those, just take note of it and try to be creative in helping and trying to find a solution to resolve it.
okay, there's another question, but I'll ask you personally. I'll text you or something.
Okay,
But
sounds good, Troy.
the other comment I was just gonna make was that I know Susan does a well with a whole bunch of strawberries in one of her
Yeah.
seasons. So how is she accomplishing that?
So strawberries are great because they have their own rhizomic layers of roots, and they don't really need a lot of care either, so they do well in ground covering. And they love the sun, so once they have those exposures and good adequate watering schedule, they kind of cross-pollinate themselves, and they start to form their own fruits. So I'm still trying to figure out how to grow more when it comes to strawberries. So I think that's a question for Suzanne that we can ask in the future.
Mhm.
Maybe at her next presentation or something. But
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I would like to know that too.
All right, I'll shut up now. Thank you. Daryl.
Appreciate it, Troy. Let me know when you have other questions. Oh, that's awesome, Lucinda. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, hoop houses are generally meant for leafy greens, something that doesn't grow so abundant or need um a lot of water usage. But I say that, but people probably still do it and do a lot, really do better, I guess. So yeah, it's a season extender option. There are some pros and cons with that. So it just really you'll start to find those out once you start to really get into it, have your own system, and having, exposure to it. And that's where I'm learning myself. I'm trying it out. I'm finding out what works for best for me, and trying to create solutions. And sometimes I go to Google and it'll help, honestly. If not that, maybe YouTube, because there's other growers out there that help in mitigating that. And if it's a humidity issue, I would say to try to locate a farmer with a higher humidity and how they mitigate that. Let me see.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
As far as redirect the wind that you mentioned a couple slides back, what
Uh-huh.
suggestions do you have for those that reside in areas that have no tree coverage to provide at least some sort of windbreaker?
So you could buy some wood and create those wind barrier structures. That's like the best, fastest way that I can think of. A slower option would be to grow shrubs or maybe even weave out some. Let's say you're in an area with overgrowth of what do you call those? Tamarisk or Russian olives that are small growth, but if you ever cut them, their sticks and everything are really flimsy. And so if you were to create a structure that would be like the supporting poles and kind of weave those sticks in between and kind of create like a mesh and put it before your hoop houses, then that would help reduce a lot of the wind blast or wind like but it's gonna take a lot of work to do, but I think that's the lowest or low cost option to go with. Other than that, you can buy some lumber and try to create like a windbreaker option that would redirect the airflow, or if you want to go a slower option to maybe grow your own shrubs or trees that are small but that would help kind of break up that wind before the hoop house. But those are options that I've been thinking about over the past 2 years that I've been exposed to hoop house growing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? As far as that wall of waters, have there been any sort of like research that some people have done like DIY projects with it?
It's funny you mentioned that because it's something I want to think about with some friends of making our own, getting a good quality plastic and there's those machines out there that will help melt them together and then creating our own. So I don't know. I don't know if it's an issue as far as copyright, but I think that if you can get creative in forming your own ideas around that, then that would work. And also Nate City, who is another grassroots farmer, he actually used some milk what do you call them? Milk containers, those plastic ones. After he used them all, he just saved them and filled them up with water. And he got 4 to 5 of them where he filled them up with water and he would put them around the base of the plant and put like a maybe plastic covering on top of that. But had some type of ventilation to it too. But he said it worked pretty well. But if you're gonna have a lot of those in your little growing space, then you're just gonna see a lot of containers. And I don't know. I feel like it's gonna look funny, but as far as figuring out other ways of doing the wall of waters, I think that's I would say to get creative with it. I know we have a lot of creative people out there. And yeah,
Okay,
do
all
what
right.
works for you and what you have access to is what I always say.
Yeah, milk containers is what we have access to.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
definitely.
that would be something to start off with. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, let me know if you ever try it.
If I get into gardening, yeah, but right now I'm at the taking care of succulent stage, but soon
Yep.
and hopefully I'll get towards growing some
Mhm.
herbs. I do want to try growing some herbs first, see how that turns out. But
Yeah,
it'll
that's awesome.
be a journey. Sorry, I have dogs in the background, but does anybody else have questions? Oh, Lucinda said a carton. Would that work?
Egg carton as a barrier for wall waters. I don't know.
I
Um,
know, I know we attended a 4-H and there was like some kind of win, and I know the lady was talking about if you use the egg carton, to plant your seed, and then you just, transfer it over because I guess the cardboard will eat itself in the dirt or whatever. But
Yeah, cardboard, anything that's cardboard made will decompose given moisture and some warmth. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it'll work. Yeah, so when it comes to the wall of waters, if you can't afford that, no biggie, you know. These little mini hoop house agrifabs will work just as well. But if you're growing something that's more temperature sensitive, like the tomatoes and chilies, then yeah, you're gonna need the extra barrier, extra help. I don't have any book recommendations. A lot of what I've learned is through people that I've worked with or some training workshops out there of other people's experiences. So I don't have any recommendation for books, sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, that will conclude our presentation for this evening. Thank you, Daryl, for providing this presentation for us. I know it'll be beneficial to many folks that are participating tonight, and hopefully they'll be incorporating this information into their gardening methods and 4-H. So a good job, Lucinda. Can't wait to hear more about it. But thank you all for joining us this evening. I do want to go ahead and close out with an announcement. I'm going to share my screen. Daryl, it's going to kick you off a little bit.
Okay,
Uh,
I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Oops. All right. Okay, so our next week webinar is going to focus on sheep and goat vaccination and health management webinar. This will be taking place on the 16th, which will be next week on Thursday. All of our webinars, have you guys known, if you guys been with us, they all start at 5:30 p.m. and end roughly around about 6:30 p.m. This presentation will be presented by the State of New Mexico veterinarian. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Eknoff, if I'm pronouncing that right. But she's going to be providing that presentation for us next week, so stay tuned. The registration's already up and going, so all you need to do is head over to our website, and under upcoming events, it will show you a list of what presentations will be offered for this month, next month, and the first week of April. But like I said, this webinar is recorded, so if you have missed something and you want to check back into a particular PowerPoint slide, it will be up on our YouTube channel. And tune in with our monthly newsletter as well. We always share a lot of USDA information, so if you want to subscribe to that, you can subscribe on our website as well. If you need to get a hold of us with any technical assistance as far as conservation planning, let us know. Jesse's contact information is on there as well. But our NSA website is right there too at nsa.nmsu.edu. But other than that, thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a good rest of your evening. Okay. I just want to give you guys a quick introduction to who we are, and as well as our team, NSA team. So we have Miss Jessie Jim. She's our NSA field coordinator, and our project director, Dr. Michael Patrick. So thank you all for joining us for the Mini Hoop House Startup webinar. This presentation will be presented by Daryl Yazzie. He's the Dene College Extension Agent. So I'll go ahead and give him the floor, or I'll soon give him the floor, sorry about that, to introduce himself. But I want to go ahead and introduce you guys to who we are as a project. So as you guys are aware, We're known as the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. In short, we call it the NSA project, and the NSA project is a New Mexico cooperative extension initiative to deliver in collaboration, of course, with our two major partners. You also see their logo down below as well. One of them is the Dene College Land Grant Office, and we also partner with COPE, which maybe some of you are familiar with, the Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. If you guys have any topics that you may want to chime in, they have a lot of topics that they cover, from livestock to crops and to farming and gardening. They have really good sources as well, so you may want to check them out as well. This project is funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. So as a goal for the NSA project is mainly to improve the operations, profitability, and sustainability of our Navajo ranchers and farmers and veteran farmers and ranchers, as well as increasing their knowledge in the use of USDA, such as NRCS, FSA, rural development, risk management agency programs and services, and those of other resource providers. And as well as always increasing the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy foods by Navajo family and individuals through our gardening programs. So the goals of the NSA project, to accomplish these goals, the NSA project is committed to providing our producers with agriculture workshops, our weekly Zoom webinars such as these that are later recorded and posted on our social platform, monthly newsletters, and most of you may have witnessed our resource fairs, such as the knowledge and the use of USDA programs. So we have NRCS, FSA, RD, and RMA, sorry about that, programs provide some of their own, I guess, programs, USDA projects and programs that they have to offer. We also provide field day demonstrations with collaboration with Dene College Land Grant Office. And we also provide individual technical assistance with conservation planning, farm and ranch plans as well. But all this information, you guys can go ahead and have access to our website at nsa.nmsu.edu for more information on upcoming events, conservation plan templates, and so forth. But thank you all for attending this evening.